Joining us now, we have Axios chief economic correspondent Neil Irwin and NBC News senior business correspondent Christine Romans, and Basil Smykel is still with us. So I appreciate you all being here. Let's go ladies first with you, shall we? Okay. So Christine, the cuts included in this bill, they're going to target not only SNAP, but Medicaid.
Yeah.
To what extent?
Well, you're talking about $560-ish billion over a decade. And you look at the Congressional Budget Office scoring of this, and that's the official scorekeeper on Capitol Hill. They say that you could have 10.9 million fewer insured Americans because of that. And that would mean less money flowing to hospitals, hospital systems, to doctors, to the people who work in the hospitals. And you talk about, like, Iowa, for example, my home state, 1 in 5 residents receives Medicaid. So you think about these states and how much Medicaid expansion has really become the landscape that we operate with. So you're talking about significant impacts.
Well, and I'm thinking, you mentioned Iowa. There's a lot of open space there, small towns built around farms, right? So then you have hospitals. If they lose that Medicaid funding, they close.
Rural hospitals are concerned about this. And basically, when you look, and however you crunch the numbers, and there's disagreement, of course, on Republicans who are for this, but you've got tax cuts that favor the rich, and you've got spending cuts that disproportionately affect the poor, the have-nots. And so that's what sort of the landscape is of this. Even the tax cuts for working people are temporary. They're meant to expire when the president is out of office. So that's sort of the state of play.
What does it tell you, Basil, that you have even Republican senators, they're worried about losing control of Congress if this bill gets passed? I mean, does this just prove the political suicide, as Senator Josh Hawley wrote about in the New York Times?
Yeah, I mean, if you're that concerned about it, speak up and say something and push back on this bill.
And he is.
Which I don't know if they really have the stomach to do, quite frankly. Absolutely right. Her hurts rural communities. I'm on the board of some organizations that interact with a lot of children in schools. You have children whose families get Medicaid, many who are disabled that won't get that kind of support. And we talk about being food insecure and housing insecure. This bill helps tip the scales in favor of that insecurity. And this is also, by the way, an attempt to not only privatize some parts of government, but also send block grants to states. And what that does is it forces the state to take on a higher financial burden and give the governors more discretion to spend that money. Now, that may be different in red states and blue states, but the reality is that it creates a tremendous amount of uncertainties to millions of Americans who are dependent on these services and programs.
And what you're saying, it gives the governors discretion. Translation, they can put the money where they want to.
That's right.
Where they want to. Neil, we have some new details on this pending China trade deal we've been talking about. The Wall Street Journal is reporting that China will impose a 6-month limit on rare earth export licenses for U.S. manufacturers. Now, I know details of the framework that's still being worked out. These discussions were happening in London Monday and Tuesday. But if it is included, what does it mean for U.S. manufacturers? Is it a short-term win, but does it solve the long-term problem then, or how do you see it?
Well, it's a short-term win that may have a way of becoming long-term. What we've seen with these kind of trade tariffs, trade agreements, temporary agreements, extensions, is the Trump administration is really willing to announce something big, a big kind of aggressive measure, and then kind of roll it over and keep delaying enforcement. And on the flip side of that, with Chinese exports of rare earths to the U.S., look, U.S. battery makers, U.S. automakers, they need these minerals. They need these to make the goods that we make in the United States. And so that's a real leverage point that Chinese have had and have been very willing to exploit to try and essentially punish the U.S. for tariffs. That does seem to be a de-escalation in these talks in London that have transpired over the last 3 days. So that is good news in the medium term, at least for U.S. manufacturers.
Okay, and I know, Christine, we were talking in detail about what these rare earth minerals do, and they're involved in everything. But let me pivot with you. Critical. They're absolutely critical on so many countless levels. The May inflation report, let's take a focus on that, because it was expected to reflect some of the trade war uncertainty, right? The numbers came out, and it was somewhat less than expected. Why is that, and when do you think we will see this reflected? What we're paying for?
Right, a couple of reasons. In May, you had a lot of stuff on the shelves that had been purchased before the tariffs took effect. You had companies, in a way I have never seen, rushing and pre-buying things, from cars to sweaters to appliances.
Really?
So you had a lot of stuff that, I mean, how many pre-tariff sales have you seen, especially at car dealerships? There's pre-tariff sales everywhere. So that's one reason. So May might have been just the very beginning when we'd start to capture the higher prices. It also could be that some companies, frankly, right now at the early stages are eating as much of the tariff as they can themselves because they're worried about losing customers, losing business. So they're trying to find sort of the lay of the land there. But most economists tell me that as time goes on, with a 55% tariff as it stands against China, you are going to start to see certain items that are going to cost more, and we'll see these numbers in the months ahead.
And there was a 55% versus a 10% in the opposite direction.
Those are big numbers.
Those
are still big
huge.
numbers.
55 is huge, for sure. Neil, let's talk about the May jobs report, because that was also slightly better than expectations. But you write, underneath the surface are signs of a weakening labor market. So tell us what that looks like. And is there any sign that Trump's immigration crackdown is already showing up in those numbers?
Yeah, there is. We saw in the May numbers a big drop in the labor force. There were fewer people either working or looking for work in the May numbers. That could have been statistical noise, but it could have been a reflection of fewer immigrants coming across the border, deportations, more people either choosing not to work or staying out of the labor force if they're worried about their immigration status. So that may be the kind of thing to keep an eye on, that if we see a smaller labor force, if we see more people either not in the U.S. or not able to work in the U.S., that's the kind of thing that could limit the job growth and limit the economic growth we see over the remainder of this year and into 26.
But Basil, I mean, Trump still feels like his immigration crackdown is a winning issue for him, right? But if there starts to be economic fallout, like a weakening labor market, for example, I mean, could that sway the president's opinion, do you think?
I don't know if it'll sway his opinion, but it'll certainly sway the opinion of many voters. I mean, look, the dollar store is now closer to $2 than $1, as I'm hearing from a lot of voters right now. They're starting to feel it. And when you think about, as you're talking about rural communities earlier, you know, in New York City, for example, we have a lot of buying options, but there's parts of this country where you don't. Walmart is it. You know, some of these other big box stores or even smaller stores, that is really what they have going on. So when those prices change, they're going to feel it and not have any options. When that happens, then I think you'll start to see voters and some electeds in those communities start to push back.
Okay. Neil Irwin, thank you very much, long distance. Christine Basil, we appreciate having you here in studio with me.